Welcome back to M News. Now, in a bid to improve public understanding of the quality study options available outside of public universities, South Africa's leading private higher education institutions have now officially launched SA Private Higher Education, a formal association that ultimately aims to increase access to higher education. And for more on this, we're very pleased to be joined in studio by Professor Alwyn Louw of Monash, who is another member on the board of SAPHE. That is SAPHE. Prof, a very good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
What a great time to talk about this. Tell us more about SAPHE. What is it all about, Prof?
Private higher education went through quite a process of refinement, development and repositioning in South Africa. For the simple reason that, higher education is such an important strategic area in South Africa to promote the development of the country, to ensure that we bring more people into the mainstream of the economy. So in other words, higher education accepts its responsibility as a partner in this process. Private higher education is playing such a strategic role in this already, because we have more than 10% of the total student body in higher education at private higher education institutions. Secondly, I think the government in the white paper on post-school education recognized the strategic importance of private higher education to the extent that by 2030, it is envisioned that private higher education will have 500,000 students in the country.
Oh, wow.
So it's becoming more and more significant. So once we talk about those numbers, private higher education will grow to 25–30% of the total student body. I think the importance is this, that we appreciate private higher education as a strategic asset in this country and that we start to manage it accordingly. And this is why our sense was, let us reorganize ourselves, let us make sure that we have a common voice so that people can understand what the role of private higher education is and people can understand what the potential is to play a significant part in driving the whole agenda of higher education. Let's
talk about that further, Professor. I mean, 11 institutions, as we were talking before we went on air, have actually come up to make up the SAPHE group. Tell us more about these institutions. And I mean, this comes at a time when we're talking about higher education fees. Just how affordable is private higher education learning?
Maybe I should just make this point, because I do believe there may be some misunderstanding of this.
Yes, Prof.
Private higher education don't get any funding from government. So in other words, all the things that are accepted for granted in public institutions like buildings, like staff, like laboratory infrastructure, everything that goes with a university, is understood as something that will just be there because government makes a contribution. Once you establish a private institution, all those things come from private money. So for that reason, we have to establish infrastructure, we have to appoint staff, we have to develop all the services around this process. And for that reason, inevitably, private higher education is more expensive for the individual than public. But for that reason, it is so important that we remain very sensitive in private higher education, that people that get into a private institution must get excellent quality education. Those qualifications must meet all the requirements of the statutory bodies. In other words, it must be accredited with the CHE, it must be registered with SAQA, it must be registered on the certificate with the Department of Higher Education and Training. So we make sure that all these things are being met to give the public out there the assurance that they will get a quality product. So in this process, it is more expensive. No one argues that. Although we try to have a differentiated model, because across the private higher education sector, we offer higher certificates, degrees, and up to master's degrees and diplomas. So in other words, it's a spectrum. So we try to have a differentiated approach based on the real cost of delivering these programs. So yes, it is more expensive, but it's not inaccessible.
Yeah, but Prof, you're speaking about a very good word there, qualification. Talk to us about this general perception that a lot of people might think that, going to a private institution, you automatically get a better CV, so to say, when you're going out in the job market. Let's talk about that perception, and let's also talk about just how different is the syllabus of the private institutions versus the public ones.
Can I just start with, refer again to our CHE requirement that we must meet?
Yes, Prof.
All private higher education qualifications in this country must go through the same accreditation process that public institutions go. So there's just no way in which a private institution can offer a legitimate qualification if it hasn't gone through that process. So comparable to all public institutions in terms of the quality of the curriculum. And I think that is important. Secondly, I think we have the benefit at the moment that private higher education institutions in general have smaller numbers of students. So the intensity of our academic programs, is different. In the sense that we have a focus on smaller classes. We make sure that we systematically work with students, engage them with industry. So we make sure that our students are sufficiently prepared to meet the world of work. And for that reason, our students, appeal to the market, and people want to appoint students that come through this process because they have the theory as well as the application orientation. And it is this type of sensitivity which we want to promote through this new body. That people have this understanding that there is sufficient security for them if they want to enter private higher education.
Absolutely, Prof. I mean, let's talk about that in broader terms. What other quality study options then are available for students in private institutions?
Private higher education accepts that it cannot just get into the sector and cherry pick. So I think that is important, because people may think we're just in it, for a bit of cherry picking and making a bit of money. That's not true. The fact is that once you meet all these requirements of the statutory bodies, it's such a level of commitment that you have to make that it cannot be a money-spinning issue only, because it's a complex process to manage. So what we're doing is we accept the fact that we have a large percentage of students coming from the school that are not ready for higher education. So we have foundation programs in a number of institutions.
Like a bridging class type, so to
where
say.
a student can come in for a year or for a period, improve their readiness for learning in higher education, and then move in. So that is the one thing we do. The second thing we do is, as I said, we have a spectrum of qualification options, higher certificates, etc. Different people have different aspirations, different needs to enter the labor market wherever their aspirations may be. And for that reason, we allow these type of opportunities. But that doesn't mean that's the end of the road. We also allow this articulation. And part of this new body is that the private institutions can talk to each other. So if people want to move amongst the institutions, we have an understanding where they can go. But that doesn't also mean that private institution is not aligned to the public institutions. A student that wants to move from public to private or from private to public, that articulation is available. So it's not the end of the road. Once you get into a private, I'm stuck here. No, you actually open the higher education door.
All right, let's open more doors, Prof. Do tell us, do you have any bursary programs that you actually have in those institutions, or that you will be facilitating with this new SAPHE?
Absolutely. Individual institutions have individual provisions. And, I'm talking on behalf of SAPHE, but I want to use an example. For example, at Monash South Africa, we've got quite a spectrum of options. And at other institutions, the same thing. So in other words, we understand that we have to make a contribution to enhance the accessibility into higher education. And for that reason, we also reinvest in the process of facilitating access.
All right, and are you going to look at more, when we're talking about public higher education now, they're looking more to develop your TVET colleges, where they're looking to develop your skills at high institution learning. Is this something that private institutions are looking towards when it comes to skills development at a high learning stage?
That's right. It's equally open also for private institutions to go into that field. We accept that skills development in this country will remain very important for very long. And for that reason, this is where the higher certificates come in and so on, already focusing on preparing people for the world of work. So it's more focused. It is, in other words, more application focused also than only a degree that may be more theory focused. So that balance already sits there in order to assist people to move into the different sectors.
Professor, where can people get more information about
this?
They
must please contact the individual private higher education institutions. I mean, they're all available on the website, and I can't quote all of them now. But please just go private higher education institutions. You will get the information and start to talk to people. Just engage. You find that in some cases, private higher educations, they're still open for registrations. So people that couldn't get access into public institutions can still approach these institutions for an opportunity.
Absolutely, Prof. Thank you so much for those great news this morning. That is Professor Alwyn Louw of Monash, who is also a member of the board of SA Private Higher Education, and he was talking to us about SAPHE, which is a new program that is run by 11 private learning institutions in South Africa to give you options if you want to study in those colleges. Go out and get the information out there at privateeducation.co.za. There it is. All right, and that's where we're going to leave it. Let's look at other news at this time.